Okay, so we know that if countries specialize according to comparative advantage and trade, they can all be made better off. It's not the case where if I benefit from trade, then you must be hurt, because how do I gain if you lose? If countries specialize in their comparative advantage and trade, everybody can gain. And it's a really powerful result. And so that's why it's sort of useful to use our production possibilities frontiers, now that we know what they are, use them because we can use them to illustrate this concept that without trade, you're restricted to consuming on or within your production possibilities frontier. But with trade, if you specialize according to comparative advantage and trade, everybody can consume outside their production possibilities frontier. Everyone can consume bundles that aren't possible for them to consume when they're just producing on their own. All the countries can. And that's really the magic of these gains from trade. And so I just want to show you, I've sort of set it up already. We know that opportunity cost is shown by the slope of the production possibilities frontier, right? So if we're making phones and TVs, we can make 60 phones and no TVs, 10 TVs and no phones. So every TV we make, we have to give up 6 phones. The slope is -6. The negative means they're inversely related. We're giving up. Each one TV we get, we have to give up 6 phones. So if we want 5 TVs, we have to give up 30 phones. Each TV cost us 6 phones. Every one TV we make, we have to give up 6 phones. Which means, of course, that they're just reciprocals. The same resources can make 6 phones or can make 1 TV. And so we can, if we want to make 1 TV, we give up 6 phones. If we want to make 1 phone, we only have to take 1/6 of those resources away from TV making. So making 1 phone makes us take resources away that makes us give up 1/6 of a TV. So 1 TV costs 6 phones, or a phone costs 1/6 of a TV. It's exactly the same relationship. It just depends which direction you're looking at it from. We'll focus on TVs because they're whole numbers instead of fractions, and those are just easier. So in country A has to give up 6 phones to make a TV. You can see here, note that country A, if they make only phones, is better at making phones than country B. If they make only TVs, 10 versus 8, they're better at making TVs than country B. Country A has the absolute advantage in production of both of these goods. If they put all their resources into it, they can make more phones or more TVs than country B. But, so you kind of think, why would A bother to trade with B? But there is an advantage. Comparative advantage, remember, means specializing according to who has the lowest opportunity cost. So the first step is to say, who has the comparative advantage? What are the opportunity costs? So we found it in country A. In country B, it's the same thing. 1 TV cost us 5 phones. To increase our production of TVs by 1 is going to cost us 5 phones. So we can make 40 phones and no TVs. But if we want to make 2 TVs, we can only make 30 phones. If we want to make 3 TVs, we can only make 25 phones. Each TV takes resources away from phone production. So each increase in TV production costs us, each increase in TV production costs us 5 phones. Every additional TV we make, we have to give up producing 5 phones. And of course, the reciprocal is each phone costs us 1/5 of a TV. So now that we have the opportunity cost, we can say, who has the comparative advantage? Comparative advantage means you can make it more cheaply. You don't give up as much as the other producers. And so you can see that country B has the comparative advantage in TV production. They only give up 5 phones to make a TV. Country A gives up 6 phones to make a TV. So it's cheaper. They give up less other production. So country B should specialize in making phones and just trade them to country A, because country B gives up less other production. So why should A be giving up more production than it needs to if country B can do it cheaper? Just like anything, if somebody can do it cheaper than you, why do it yourself? Let them do it. But if it costs me $10 to do something and you'll pay me $12 for it, then I'll do it for you. But if it costs me $14 to do something and I can have you do it for $12, I'll pay you to do it. Right? It doesn't make sense to make yourself what it's cheaper for somebody else to make. And that's what this is all about. It looks all complicated here, but fundamentally, like so much in economics, we complicate it with the models, but the models are really useful. But the fundamental concept is pretty straightforward. If somebody can make it cheaper than you, you're better off buying it from them. If somebody will pay you more than it costs you to make it, you're better off if you can sell it to them. That's all there is. And so we specialize according to comparative advantage, and then we trade. And we say, well, how much should we trade? How many phones should we give for each TV? And if you think about it that way, just to use some jargon, the terms of trade is just how much of one good trades for another. So how many, in this case, how many phones should trade for one TV? That's going to make that, remember, the goal here is to make everybody better off. Not to make one person indifferent or one person worse, but everybody better off. And to make country B better off, you're saying, how many phones do I have to pay you for every TV? If you're going to sell me a TV, if you're going to export a TV to me in international trade lingo, sell it to me or export it to me. Well, I have to give up 5 phones to make a TV, says country B. You have to pay me something bigger than 5 phones. For B to be happy. You have to pay the seller more than it costs them to make, or the exporter. That makes sense, right? B is not, no seller is going to be happy if you don't pay them more than it costs them to make. No one's going to be better off if they don't get paid more than it costs them to make. That's all we're saying. It costs B 5 phones, they need to get more than 5 phones. At the same time, by the same token, those terms of trade need to be something less than 6 phones for A to be happy. Right? Because A can make a TV by taking the resources out of phone production and giving up the production of 6 phones themselves. They're not going to pay B more than it would cost to make themselves. They won't be any better off. If I could change my oil and it only cost me $25 in materials and time effort, if I could change my oil for $25, I'm not going to pay somebody else $40 to do it. Right? I would only pay somebody else to change my oil if they could do it more cheaply than it would cost me to do myself. Same thing here. It costs country A 6 phones to make a TV. They're not going to pay country B any more than that. So the terms of trade have to be somewhere between 5 phones and 6 phones per TV. So you're kind of thinking, a half a phone, 5.5 phones? But no one wants a half a phone, so who's going to trade a half a phone? But the thing is, this is just the ratio, right? So it's just saying whatever the trade is, it should be in a ratio between 5 and 6 phones per TV. But we can trade more than one phone and more than one TV. So let's say, you see country A originally was at, oh, I didn't mention that is their C0. These are just original consumption points I picked for fun, but those are points on their production possibilities frontier. They could use all their resources. So assume that country A was consuming here at 30 and 5, and country B was consuming here at 30 and 2. And then they specialize according to comparative advantage. So country B produces all TVs because they have the lower opportunity cost to make TVs, and country A produces all phones because they have a lower opportunity cost. 1/6 is less than 1/5. So each country specializes. So they were consuming at C0 and C0. Now they were producing and consuming at the same place, right? This was P0 and C0. They were consuming what they were producing because they weren't trading. So now they specialize. B produces all TV, A produces all phones, and then they trade. So let's say country B gives country A was originally having, so let's say they give country A 5 of their TVs. They make 8 TVs. They send 5 TVs to country A. So they're left with 3. And so country A gets 5 TVs from B. So they were at 8 TVs and now they've given 5 away, so they have 3. They were at no TVs and they've gotten 5, so they have 5. So what's the ratio? How many, if that happens, how many phones could country A give in return for these 5 TVs that would make both countries better off? And I suggest you pause this video right now and think about that yourself. How many phones could country A trade for those 5 TVs and make both country A and country B better off in the sense that they can consume outside their production possibilities frontier? They can consume at points where they couldn't produce on their own. Okay, so I'm hoping you paused and thought about that yourself. If you didn't, well, you're just cheating your own learning. So anyhow, it's 5 TVs, so it has to be less than 6 phones per TV for number of phones for 5 TVs would have to be less than 30 phones or greater than 25 phones. If it's 25 phones for 5 TVs, that's at a ratio bigger than 5 to 1. That's going to make country B happy because they're getting paid more than it costs them to make. If it's less than 30 phones per TV, 30 phones for 5 TVs, less than 6 phones per TV, that's going to make country A happy. And you can see, and this is why the production possibilities frontier is useful to sort of visualize this, you can see that if country B trades 5 TVs to country A, if they had 3 TVs, produce 3 TVs on their own, they could produce 25 phones. If country A gives them anything more than 25 phones, I'm trying to pick a color that shows up better. That doesn't stand out. If country A gives them anything more than 25 phones, when they still have 3 TVs, they're going to be outside their production possibilities frontier. Anything more than 25 phones, when country B gave up 5 TVs, you can see 3 and 25 is on their PPF. 3 and something bigger than 25 is outside their PPF. They're happier. But looking over here at country A, if they get these 5 TVs, they could, if they got those 5 TVs, give up 30 phones and be just where they were before. So if they get those 5 TVs and can give up less than 30 phones, so they can have 5 TVs and something greater than 30 left over, you can see they would be outside their production possibilities frontier. So anything that is less than 30 phones per TV puts country A outside their PPF. Anything that is more than 25 phones per TV puts country B outside their PPF. And this is less than 30 phones because remember, country A started up here. They made 60. So giving up 30 would take them down to here. If they can give up less than 30, they're going to end up at a point like this. So let's say, for instance, 27. That's a number between 25 and 30. So country B gets 3 TVs and 27 phones, C1, outside their production possibility frontier. And country A gets those 5 TVs and only has to give up 27 phones, and so they're left with 33. So they're also consuming outside their production possibilities frontier. It's a really powerful result, and that's why it's worth illustrating and thinking about, because there's a lot of debate over trade, and there's a lot of reasons countries restrict trade, and there's a lot of complicated things that go on with trade. But it's really important to get this fundamental concept that generally freer trade is going to be more beneficial than less free trade, because if somebody has a comparative advantage, that means they can do it more cheaply. If they can make it more cheaply than you can make it, you're better off buying it from them. Like A is better off getting their TVs from B. And if B can sell it to A for more than it costs them to make, they're better off. And so if everyone specializes in what they can do most cheaply, they give up the least other production, we can maximize world production. There will be more stuff, and so we can trade it, and everyone can have more stuff than they could have if we just restricted ourselves to what we can produce. So again, this is a very simplified example, and of course there are a lot of reasons like human rights and other political reasons that we want to restrict trade, or we might want to nurture industries in our own country, or be worried about losing jobs in our own country. But the idea is, why not put jobs where we have the comparative advantage and let other people make things that they can make cheaper, and we'll put our jobs where we have the comparative advantage. Of course, not everyone can move to the Silicon Valley and start making software where the US has a comparative advantage. And so it's not as simple. I'm not saying it's simple, but the fundamental concept is really key, and that's why it's worth spending some time thinking about and understanding, because this is one of the few things most economists agree on. Not that free trade is great, but that moving towards freer trade and understanding the value of trade, and perhaps managed trade and trade that takes into account there are people we don't want to trade with for various reasons, but taking all of that into account, if countries specialize in what they have the comparative advantage in trade, everyone can be better off. And that's not just countries, that's individuals too. Like I said with changing my oil. If somebody can make something more cheaply than I can make it, it makes sense for me to buy it from them. And so everyone does their job that they can do best, and they earn their money from that, and they pay other people to do their jobs that they're doing best. Specializing according to comparative advantage and trading increases the total output and can make everybody better off, allows everyone to consume at points they couldn't consume if they did everything on their own. Imagine if you tried to produce everything on your own that you consume. That's just really hard to imagine, and you would have a lot less. Maybe you'd be happier. You go live off the grid and live in a forest, like Little House in the Big Woods. But it's a fundamental truth that yes, you can specialize. If you specialize according to comparative advantage in trade, everyone can consume at points where they couldn't produce on their own.